let's move on to Devon Achane. Devon, by the way, 5'8", 188. However, he does have the speed to match. This is a 4.32 guy all the way to the right here when you look at his distribution. So a very fast guy. Vertical jump, though, only 33. So not maybe as explosive as some of the other guys. When you look at, his time at Texas A&M, this is an offense that will throw to the backs, but he wasn't particularly he was on the field a lot. He only averaged 0.66 yards per route run, but when they did throw him the ball, he caught it. 36 of 44 targets. He averaged 3.6 yards per carry after contact, which is 49th in college football, 53 missed tackles forced, which is 31st. So he did some stuff, at Texas A&M that got your attention. I think he's very clearly, though, a notch below the top three guys that we've talked about, Thomas.
A notch below, but let's realize that there are people like this. And, when you look at Devon and you look at his numbers, and I know you mentioned they not as explosive as you would like. 4.32, however, we'll take that with a 33-inch vertical. I think that's what his vert was, right? Yep. Because that speed is legit and it's real. Maybe not up to the same level, but a good guy, again, back to that mix of players where you have if you have the ability to have some sort of novelty to your offensive game and your running back group. To me, this is a guy to look at. Now, where he goes, I don't know where he's projected with the groups. Personally, guys like this can go in the third and fourth round, and they can be legitimate enough. They may fall, who knows? But the reality is there are benefits here. It's interesting that he actually plays out as maybe the fourth best running back in the league. So you never know.
Yeah, I'm mostly using some aggregate mock type of stuff. I think, here's another good question, I think, before we get to our last guy and close a little bit. Because when you look at running backs, Bijan Robinson is going to be the first guy taken here. That's, great. It's not always a lock who the best guy is, right? And oftentimes it's sort of like styles make fights for a team. So I think about 2020, the Chiefs have the 32nd pick. Jonathan Taylor is widely thought of as the best running back in that class. DeAndre Swift is also thought of very highly. J.K. Dobbins is also thought of very highly. And the Chiefs go with Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who by, I think, many people's projections was probably third or fourth guy on that list. But at least to the Chiefs' mind, he was what fit them the best, right? And of course, they probably weren't correct. He probably want Jonathan Taylor in hindsight. But, you think about the following draft, it was Najee Harris, and then it was Travis Etienne. And I think you can make a case that Travis Etienne is probably the better back now, even though Harris has a lot of cool things to him. He's tough. He can catch the ball. He can take a big workload. Etienne has been injured for a year, but was very effective last year. I think the question is where do these guys stack up? I think a lot of it depends upon what an offense is looking like. If your lead back is a smaller guy, you're going to go after a Charbonnet as your two in the draft, right, as opposed to a guy like Achane. And so I think it really does depend. Or I'm not an expert on running backs, but I kind of, when I watch these guys, I can kind of tell the differences between them. It's like if you have an offense that's a little bit more where the running back has to extend things, like maybe an outside zone kind of team, like maybe you don't want a certain guy, versus if you are more of a power counter man team where your running back's got to hit it up more quickly and be tougher like that. So I think a lot of it is styles make fights, Thomas. And that can really, if you're thinking about betting the draft, you're thinking about just prognosticating like we will on the Thursday of the first day, that can really throw a wrench into your predictions, because we're really not necessarily as close to the action as far as what the scheme is looking for as these actual teams are.
Yeah, and just for perspective on scheme, I remember when we were in the process of deciding on the types of running backs, we would go in, Dan Quinn and I, especially, of course, Mike Smith and I would do it, but Dan Quinn and I, for sure, with his staff, we would go in and talk to all of our, whoever our coordinator was at the time, and talk about scheme and how we could utilize. As much as I'm not a big believer in the coaching staff dictating who you truly want to draft, believe me, I tap into it and we have our conversations. Our our scouting department and our personnel um, directors and such were out on the road, and they have a really good feel for who would be the next up for us. But it was important for me to understand as a GM what the scheme was. Again, not to protract on this, it is a really important thing to make sure you have the right fit. All of a sudden, you draft someone who's not necessarily the right fit, doesn't have an understanding of it, that might not have exactly the ability to really thrive in an outside zone scheme, and you could be in a really tough situation. You've drafted someone in the third or fourth round who are just playing special teams for you, and when they get on the field, it's not a fit for you. So
Yeah.
just remember how important that is.
Does that make it hard as a scout? Like, and is that really so? Now the Patriots have changed schemes a lot. I mean, they were a 3-4 team when no one was a 3-4 team. They were a 4-3 team when the whole league tried to switch. When you're a scout and are you scouting for scheme, or are you scouting traits, and are you allowing the decision makers above you, the GM, the directors, all that, are they like re-weighing the traits? How does that go? Like, just to kind of get off on a tangent a little bit here, when you do change schemes at the team level and you're an evaluator, like, because oftentimes, one of the things is like scouts last longer than some of the regimes, right? And so like when you do have those changes, are you looking for new things, or is that something where you're scouting normally, you're scouting as you would always scout, and then you let the decision makers kind of make a decision based upon your data there?
One of the very important things to understand is every year, whether it's a new head coach or a changing of the scheme, we usually like to sit down with our staffs, our coaches, and our personnel department and have our learning seminars, right? Where are we with scheme? What are we looking for? How have our position requirements changed? So when our scouts go out on the road, they have an understanding of what we're looking for at the running back position, or the tight end position, or the outside backer position. Really, really important. The good teams out there who spend the time more than just a random check the box. They really spend the time with their coaches, interacting with the personnel department when they go out and they have an idea. Let me say this to your question beyond that. We grade their scheme, we grade their traits with scheme in mind. So ultimately, you're going to grade that player per the running back position. You're going to grade him for all of his talents with the metric tree that we have set up at that position. As well, when you're writing up your summary, it's imperative that you are talking about what we are talking about, how we would fit into the scheme. You can't blindly just write up players and give them grades and not mention where they are. It's imperative that a scout is very descriptive with how the subjective side. Look, we're Sumer Sports and we're an analytics company. We're about numbers. But in the end, and you've said this, and I'd love you to opine on this quickly from an analytics standpoint, there is a place for subjectivity within our evaluation.
Well, you remember when you guys signed Brandon Fusco, right? Like that was John T, and it was like, hey, like you were looking for guards that were really good at outside zone and not really good at anything else, right? Like that was kind of the value you were looking for. And like that, so I'll take it back. Like analytics can steer you in the wrong direction if you don't do that. If I just take all the data and add it all up and say this guy's in your verbiage, a 3, right? Yeah. Then I'm missing, because I'm looking at league averages, and you're not a league average team. When you guys were running, the Shanahan and then the Stark offense, it was like you wanted outside zone players, and you didn't really give a shit what he was like on power counter man, because you were never going to run that on your team. And in fact, and this is the Belichick thing too, and I think you said this on the Wharton pod, which is great, where like Mike Vrabel does these 3 things really well, and that's exactly what we're going to ask him to do. So who gives a shit what he's going to do everywhere else? It's if I can go to you and look at the data, and again, this is the thing that analytics can help you with. If you say, look, I really just want a guy who can scoop the hell out of backside run plays at left guard, then I can just look at those plays and be like, he's actually a 6 there. And now in the open market, he costs a 4. So you're getting, and again, but you're getting a 2 of surplus here just because of the way you think about the game and run the game versus, and it's the same thing in the draft. Like if you draft a guy who is very good at what you do, and not very good at what everybody else does, the rest of the league might think he's a scrub, but he might be very good in your system. And again, that's how you find value in the league. And that's how analytics can go from being something that's a blunt instrument that can't find that value to something that is actually probably the best at finding it, because it's being paired with a great question, which is, can you find me this guy that has these traits?
Look, I was, again, reiterating that I was in Phoenix at the owners' meetings and talking to certain general managers about this, and it continues to come up, right? The idea that, it's really important to know what's expected out of your players, right? Scheme related. It's so important to know the direction. It's important to know that you are grading that player for what he is, skill wise, but it's imperative that you know what your team is doing, what your team is looking for. We can go on and on about this, but I don't want to overplay it. But if you don't have a grasp of that, if you don't have a grasp of where Kyle Shanahan is coming from with his run game, and you're not understanding that as a scout or so, especially as a general manager, man, you are losing so much ground in this business. Quite honestly, I don't think you'll be there. I don't think you're going to thrive. I don't think you have an opportunity to be a general manager if you're not one of those guys that keeps up more on just, I am only grading traits. Traits are great, no question about it, meaning you're grading the player. You have to have a well-rounded idea of how you're delivering it. Last thing, it was imperative that in those final summaries, albeit subjective, that you were painting a picture. And we can argue about this. We could argue about it within consumer sports, right? How important is that final summary in painting a picture? It's important for the head coach to know what he's getting. It's important for the scouts to paint a picture for the GM when he's up there getting ready to pull the tag off the board. But in the end, yes, it does come down to the numbers. And that's what we're trying to get to, right? To show these general managers and football people, subjectivity is great. It's amazing and it's really important. However, do not overlook the elements of objectivity and the numbers that can provide so much more. This is where the issue is in the NFL. When you get general managers and personnel directors who are uncomfortable with data and they get a little unnerved by it, that's a complicated thing. They start to push away and think, I'm going to go to what I feel comfortable with. And quite honestly, that's where mistakes can happen. Big picture.
Well, and football is a game where aggregation is difficult, right? And it's difficult at many levels, right? So I can tell you that I have a left tackle who's a 6 and a right and a left guard who's a 4 and a center who's a 5, and like I can't just take the average of those guys. I got to know how they work together. I got to know how, what scheme is my left guard always going to be a guy who is helping the left tackle, or am I going to be more of a team that shades to the right guard and this guy's got to block head up? All that stuff that has to matter. And it matters for players too, to your point. Like I can go through the metric tree and be like, this guy's a 6, a 5, a 4, a 7, an 8. And then the final evaluation is putting it all together. Like as a guy who in college, I had like a 37 in vertical and I ran a 4.6. Like I had those things. I was a crappy player because I couldn't put it together. The person that just graded me on the individual stuff was probably, oh, this is a player. And I wasn't, because I couldn't put it together. Everything in football requires a confluence of analytics and subjectivity to put those things together in the proper context, to weigh them. And, the individual components require data, but you also got to be able to write that final summary and be like, this guy's an athlete. You can't play ball. Like that's, and that's an important thing as well. And that's a hard thing, because we want to compartmentalize things because they're easier to measure that way. And the whole matters obviously more than the sum of the parts in that case.
No question. Hit the nail on the head. And so everyone knows, again, I keep saying, I saw the pictures of this guy dunking a basketball. So he has athleticism. We always said there are pure athletes out there, but they may just not be fits to take it to the next level.
I didn't have the mental makeup to be a good football player. Ultimately, and it's a lot easier to say now that I am older and I that I'm comfortable in myself. But that was the honest to God's truth. Let's do